There was some technical glitch. I overcame that. I'm sorry for that. Anyway, cutting it short, I now request Jain Prashant to introduce Professor Prasad Rao to the audience and also to the forum, and also introduce the subject. James, please take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I welcome everyone for the 427th session of Telangana Jana Vedika's forum on this Sunday. Our topic today is globalization, World Trade Organization, and India. People 1,000 years ago did not think in terms of boundaries and territories, and a modern political map would not make sense to them. Our contemporary maps misrepresent the past by suggesting that territorial areas contain indivisible, illimitable, and exclusive sovereign states. And these roadmaps may prove to be a poor roadmap to the future also. Modern politics emerged and was shaped by communities tied to a piece of land, the nation state. And in Europe, this saw the centralization of political power, the creation of state structures, and the emergence of a sense of order between states, and also the emergence of governance via institutions. While the creation of empire and colonialism saw this accountability denied to others. Today, we are living through another political transformation, which could be as important as the creation of the nation state. That is, the exclusive link between geography and political power has now been broken to the emergence of international institutions post-World War II. Our new era has seen layers upon layers of governance spread within and across transnational political borders. New international institutions have linked sovereign states together and sovereignty beyond the nation state. A body of regional and international law has been developed that underpins an emerging system of global governance, both formal and informal, with many layers. 150 years ago, there were 2 to 3 international summits per year. But today, policymakers of various countries attend more than 4,000 of them. They include summits of the United Nations, G7, International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization, EU, etc., etc. These summits and many other official and unofficial meetings lock governments into global and regional and multi-layered systems of governance that they can barely monitor, let alone control. Held and others say, historians and anthropologists have been telling us that people and societies have been connected since millennia. In that sense, globalization has been going on since the dawn of history. But in this day, and especially since the past 7 decades and since the post-World War II era, globalization is entirely different in scale and nature. It does not mean the end of the nation state or death of politics, but it certainly means that politics can no longer be based simply on nation states. We cannot predict or know its final outcome, but we can at least define the central outcome of the global age, which is rethinking our values, identities, and institutions so that politics remains an important vehicle for human aspiration and needs. The distinctiveness of globalization can be found out by the forms it has taken throughout history in all the areas of activity, such as economy, culture, politics, environment. And we have to keep in mind that the thread that binds all these things together is people. But what does globalization actually mean? And what do we know about it? Globalization is made up of the accumulation of links across the world's major regions and across many domains of activity. It is not a single process. It stretches social, political, and economic activities across the boundaries and continents. The intensity of interdependence increases as flows of trade, investment, finance, culture increases. It speeds up the world via new transportation and communication methods, enabling people, information, and capital to move quickly. And this means that distant events have impact on our lives and local developments have global consequences. It means that every aspect of our pattern of lives are touched by globalization. If the context of global governance can be better understood by understanding international institutions, then we shall have more clarity regarding the role they play in the global order. It is not easy to analyze because the concept is very broadly defined. Most institutional scholars define the concept as a set of rules that stipulate the ways in which states should cooperate and compete with each other, and also lay out clearly unacceptable kinds of behavior. Although these rules are usually incorporated into formal international organizations, states themselves must choose to obey the rules they created. However, we find that states sometimes operate through these institutions, and those rules that they make reflect the state calculations of self-interest based primarily on the distribution of power in the international arena. Here, the example is NATO. The most powerful states in the system create and shape institutions so that they can maintain their share of world power. The existence of various international institutions, transnational, multinational organizations that have been in focus in the past 7 decades can be understood within the context of a broader structure that ultimately rests upon the power of the states. In this context, Joseph Stiglitz says, globalization is not working for many of the world's poor, and it is not working for the stability of the global economy. But he says, abandoning globalization is neither feasible nor desirable. East Asia's success was based on globalization, especially in the opportunities of trade and increased access to technology. Globalization has brought better healthcare as well as an active global civil society fighting for more democracy, human rights, and social justice. The problem is not with globalization, but with how it has been managed. Part of the problem lies with international economic institutions, with the International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization, and World Bank, which help set up the rules of the game. Too often, they have done it in ways which have served the interests of most industrialized nations and of particular interests within those countries, rather than those of the developing world. They too have often approached globalization from particular narrow mindset shaped by a particular vision of the economy and society. Professor Stiglitz is, of course, there are many voices calling for structural reforms of international institutions. Therefore, we need to look at as the sovereign states become non-sovereign due to power shifts from head of states to head of corporations. This directly transcends how international institutions operate. The current era can be seen in this slide. Coming to India's story, I would like to quickly quote from Jaideep Hardikar's book, Ram Rao, The Story of India's Farm Crisis. We were also privileged to have him speak with us on our forum a couple of months ago. He says, many experts argue that a key concern is India's over-dependence on American cotton as a source of varietal research. Though American varieties have higher productivity, it has increasingly been established that their cultivation is not sustainable in India. Vidarbha is a great example. Since American cotton is not suitable for India due to agroclimatic incompatibility, it leads to frequent crop failures. It also requires more water, more inputs, and its yields plummets after 3 years. Although unsuitable for Indian conditions, the long staple American cotton is popular because machines to gin and spin desi cotton are not readily available. He says that scientists have found out promising research that desi varieties outperform Hirsutum varieties by a margin of 34 to 50% and suited to water scarcity conditions. But this research faces constraints. NCF report states that they have good fiber quality. Farmers have registered huge savings and were able to do multi-cropping. In spite of outstanding performance by desi varieties, their commercial popularization is extremely poor. The entire Indian cotton industry is built on hybrid seeds. About 3,000 BT cotton hybrid seeds are marketed by private companies with catchy and popular names across the country. According to reports, not much of a difference can be found between BT and hybrid cotton seeds, but cost of production is double. The large-scale BT cotton use has meant that India has lost its indigenous cotton diversity and germplasm, leading to a monoculture of one type of hybrid. These are the consequences of globalization. This is a very complex topic because it is pertinent for everyone to understand global order and governance. It has setbacks and it also has given great dividends to humanity. And to help us to understand the issues of globalization, World Trade Organization, and India, we are very privileged to have one of the senior most academicians with us this evening, Professor M. Prasada Rao. We are thrilled to have you with us, sir. Professor M. Prasada Rao has done his MA Economics, BL, PGDAS, and PhD, and has done his PhD from the University of Sussex, UK. He has retired as a professor in the Department of Economics, Andhra University, Visakhapatnam. He completed his PhD under the supervision of outstanding scholars, Professor Michael Lipton and Dr. Diana Hunt and late Pramit Chowdhury, University of Sussex, as the prestigious Commonwealth Academic Staff Scholar in the world. He is a development economist with 36.5 years of experience in teaching, research, and administration. He has published 15 books and 50 research papers in national and international journals. His research interests are in the area of rural development, farm and non-farm activities, related studies, and employment generation in the non-farm sector, poverty eradication in rural areas, and related policy matters. He teaches microeconomic analysis, macroeconomic analysis, development economics, international economics, quantitative techniques, computer applications, law and economics. He has international experience as postgraduate Senate representative, University of Sussex, United Kingdom. He was given Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan Award for Best Academician for the year 2007. He was awarded Brightman Award for Jattu Bhavana Samakya Samaika Ashram, Parvatapuram in its anniversary in 2003, and also bagged Man of the Decade Award 2019 by Alliance Club International. Best Researcher Award by Andhra University in 2006, and is also the recipient of State Best Teacher Award 2014 by the Government of Andhra Pradesh. He was the head Department of Economics and Honorary Director, UGC Center for SARC Studies, Andhra University. He has held many positions, and all of them, too many to include everything here. I'm just telling a few of them here. And he has the head Department of Economics and Honorary Director, UGC Center for SARC Studies. Also served as Honorary Director, Population Research Center, PRC, established by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. He has served as Nodal Officer to the Central Tribal University of Andhra Pradesh. He has also served as Honorary Director, AP Study Circle, Visakhapatnam. 13 candidates under his able guidance have been awarded PhD degrees by Andhra University. He has received Lifetime Achievement Award 2021 by International Education Forum, Australia, New South Wales, Australia. Currently, he's the visiting professor to the Damodaram Sanjay National Law University, Sarvavaram, Visakhapatnam. We are most honored to have a distinguished scholar in our midst. And now, before I hand over the floor to our moderator, as per our tradition at Telangana Jana Vedika, I would like to read the preamble of our constitution. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity of integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November, 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. Now, I would like to hand over the floor to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I would like to ask Professor Akutota Srinivasulu to moderate and invite Professor Prasada Rao to speak, please. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. తెలంగాణ జన వేదిక జూమ్ ఆన్లైన్ మీటింగ్ కు చేసినటువంటి ప్రొఫెసర్ ప్రసాద్ రావు గారికి మరియు ఇతర ప్రొఫెసర్లకు అదేవిధంగా జనవేదిక సభ్యులందరికీ సాయంకాలం నమస్కారాలు తెలియజేస్తూ అందరికీ స్వాగతం సుస్వాగతం. ఇవాటి ప్రధానమైనటువంటి అంశం ప్రపంచీకరణ, ప్రపంచ వాణిజ్య సంస్థ, భారత్ దృక్పథం అనేటువంటి అంశాన్ని మనము ఇవాళ డిస్కస్ చేసుకోబోతున్నాం. నిజానికి చాలా గొప్ప సబ్జెక్టు ఇది. ఒక గంట లోపల 2 గంటలో చెప్పేటువంటి అంశం కాదు. ఇది చాలా విశాలమైనటువంటి సబ్జెక్టుగా మనం చెప్పడానికి అవకాశం ఉంటుంది. ఎందుకంటే 31 సంవత్సరాల ఈ ప్రపంచీకరణ అనేటువంటిది ఏ రకంగా భారతదేశంలో దాని యొక్క ప్రభావాన్ని చూపింది, దానివల్ల లాభాలు ఏంటి, నష్టాలు ఏం జరిగాయి అనేటువంటి విషయంలో లోతుగా పోవాల్సినటువంటి అవసరం ఉంది అని చెప్పేసి భావిస్తూనే, దానికి తోడు ప్రపంచ వాణిజ్య సంస్థ కూడా ఏ రకమైనటువంటి విషయాల లోపల మనము భారత్ ముందడుగు వేసింది, వెనుకడుగు వేసింది అనేటువంటిది కూడా మనం చర్చించాలి. నిజంగా ప్రపంచీకరణ అంటే ఒకే ఒక్క పదంలో చెప్పాలంటే భారత ఆర్థిక వ్యవస్థను ప్రపంచ ఆర్థిక వ్యవస్థకు అనుసంధానం చేయడమే ప్రపంచీకరణగా చెప్పుకోవచ్చు. వస్తువులను ఉత్పత్తి కానీ, వస్తువులను కానీ, సేవలు కానీ ఎగుమతులు దిగుమతులు చేసుకునేటువంటి అవకాశం ఉంటుంది. అదే విధంగా ఈ యొక్క ఇవాళ వరల్డ్ ట్రేడ్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్ ఏదైతే చెప్తున్నామో దాన్నే మనము ఘాట్ అనేటువంటి పేరుతో మనం ఇంతకు ముందు పిలిచే జనరల్ అగ్రిమెంట్స్ ఆన్ ట్రేడ్ అండ్ టారిఫ్ అనేటువంటి పేరుతో ఉండేది. దాన్నే మనం వరల్డ్ ట్రేడ్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్ గా చూడడం అనేటువంటి జరుగుతుంది. సరే, దాంట్లో కూడా భారతదేశం ఒక సభ్య దేశంగా ఉంది. సో ఈ విధంగా చెప్పుకుంటూ పోతే ఇవాళ ప్రభుత్వాలు, అటు కేంద్ర ప్రభుత్వం కానీ, ఇటు రాష్ట్ర ప్రభుత్వాలు కానీ మా దేశానికి లేదా మా రాష్ట్రానికి అనేక పెట్టుబడులను తీసుకొస్తున్నాము అనేటువంటిది, కొత్త పరిశ్రమలు తీసుకొస్తున్నామని ఏవైతే చెప్తున్నారో వాటన్నిటికీ మూలము ఈ యొక్క ప్రపంచీకరణ, ప్రపంచ వాణిజ్య సంస్థ అనేటువంటిది చాలా స్పష్టంగా చెప్పవచ్చు. ఇంకో ప్రధానమైనటువంటి విషయం ఏంటంటే ప్రభుత్వాలు నిర్ణయాలు ఏవైతే కొన్ని నిర్ణయాలు తీసుకుంటూ ఉంటాయో, కొన్ని కఠినమైన నిర్ణయాల వెనుక ఈ యొక్క ప్రపంచ బ్యాంకు కానీ, ప్రపంచ వాణిజ్య సంస్థ కానీ ఈ ప్రపంచీకరణ అనేటువంటిది, వరల్డ్ బ్యాంక్ అనేటువంటిది ప్రధానమైనటువంటి పాత్ర వహిస్తాయి. అవి సామాన్య ప్రజలకు తెలియదు. కానీ ప్రభుత్వ విధానాలపైన, ప్రపంచ లోపల ఉండేటి అనేకమైనటువంటి దేశాల పైన ఈ యొక్క ప్రభుత్వ విధానాల పైన ప్రపంచ బ్యాంకు, ప్రపంచీకరణ మరియు ప్రపంచ వాణిజ్య సంస్థల యొక్క విధానాలే ఎక్కువగా ఉంటాయనేటువంటి విషయాన్ని మనము గ్రహిస్తూ ఇవాళ ప్రపంచీకరణ, ప్రపంచ వాణిజ్య సంస్థ, భారత్ దృక్పథం అనేటువంటి అంశం పైన ప్రొఫెసర్ ఎం ప్రసాద్ రావు గారు, వారు డిపార్ట్మెంట్ ఆఫ్ ఎకనామిక్స్ లో ఎడ్యు డిపార్ట్మెంట్ గాను, బోర్డ్ ఆఫ్ స్టడీస్ చైర్పర్సన్ గాను, డీన్ ఆఫ్ సోషల్ సైన్సెస్ గాను వారు పనిచేశారు. వారు అనేక మంది రీసెర్చ్ స్కాలర్లు వారి దగ్గర PhD స్కాలర్లుగా పనిచేసి ఎంతో ఉన్నతమైనటువంటి పదవులు వాళ్ళు కొనసాగుతున్నారు. వారిని అంశం మీద మాట్లాడవలసిందిగా ప్రొఫెసర్ ప్రసాద్ రావు గారిని ఆహ్వానిస్తున్నారు. థ్యాంక్ యూ.
థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్ అండి. Distinguished dignitaries, most respected Sri Ramu Garu, convener, Telangana Jana Vedika. Am I audible to you all?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Sri Manoj Garu, Telangana Jana Vedika. Sri James Prasad Garu, శ్రీ ఆకుతోట శ్రీనివాసులు గారు, ప్రొఫెసర్ విశ్వనాథ్ రెడ్డి గారు, and other organizers of the Telangana Jana Vedika, other dignitaries, scholars, students, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you all. It is indeed an honor and proud privilege to participate in this wonderful and prestigious 127th lecture series. I'm grateful to the 127th. Yeah, am I right, sir? 427th lecture series. I'm grateful to the organizers, particularly Ramu Garu, Manoj Garu, and others for inviting me to speak in this Telangana Jana Vedika. Couple of days back, Vishwanath Reddy Garu introduced me to Telangana Jana Vedika to give a lecture on a very important aspect of my own. And I discussed with the organizers and finally chosen this topic. And the topic chosen particularly, of course, related to the Indian economy. Globalization, WTO and India is a very vast, already this introduced by Prasad and James Prasad and others already mentioned that it's very vast subject and very important in the backdrop of COVID-19 also crisis. And we are all very much concerned about the living standards of our people, the Indian masses. I just want to share some of my thoughts with the young minds and the future generations and tomorrow's citizens about some of the views. And as you know, as Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead, but generations will continue forever. And that's why for us, next generation is always important to all of us. Coming to the brass tacks, the globalization, the burning subject. It has been burning subject, burning topic for the last 31 years from the Indian point of view. And when you talk about globalization, two important things. If you remember, decontrols and deregulations. And these two things, if you understand carefully, you'll be able to understand globalization and its effects and its importance and everything about the whole world. And here, globalization means, already Prasad pointed out, it's not a single dimension. It's a globalization means different things to different people. And particularly, I'm quoting the Deepak Nair, Professor Deepak Nair, a well-known international economist and former Vice Chancellor, Delhi University, and a professor of international economics, and also is a professor in the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Also worked for some time when I was doing my thesis under the able guidance of Professor Michael Lipton and Professor Diana Hunt and Professor Pramit Chowdhury. And he also taught for some time at the University of Sussex. Professor Deepak Nair defined globalization means simply is an expansion of economic activities across political boundaries of nation states. Economic activities, as we know, is nothing but combining the factors of production, land, labor, capital, organization. Then only goods and services will come out for the use of utilization of satisfying the masses of this world. And more importantly, perhaps it refers to the process. The process is important. And so it is not easily understood the meaning of globalization without understanding the process of globalization. And it refers to a process of most interesting aspect, the deepening of economic integration. What exactly the deepening of economic integration? Is the unification of economic policies. And we heard German unification. And in the globalization also, the unification of economic policies between different countries through the partial or full abolition of tariffs and non-tariff restrictions on trade. Now, what it means no barriers for international trade or for internal trade. That means free movement of labor, harmonized tax rates, and common monetary and fiscal policies. And also free movement of capital and services. Different nations, different national regulations, and common external tariffs and reduction of tariffs between members. Broadly, you can be able to understand what exactly the deepening of what we call economic integration. And some of the examples of regional economic integration. You know, NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, and also an agreement among the US, Canada, and Mexico, and also European Union, a trade agreement with 15 countries, European countries. And another example is APEC, and the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. And this includes NAFTA members and Japan and China. This is one of the important process of globalization. And also another important aspect of process of globalization is increasing economic openness. What exactly in our minds, the economic openness, and in the minds of globalizers, and in the minds of people and governments as a whole. And economic openness in political economy terms, the degree to which non-domestic transactions, that means, as we understand, imports and exports take place and also affect the size and growth of national economy. And it means the degree of openness is measured by the actual size of registered imports and exports within a national economy, also known as IMPEX rate, imports and exports rate. And also openness is an indispensable enabler of growth. Maybe in the growth rate differs between the nations, and also job creation and poverty reduction. And also trade provides new market opportunities for domestic firms and stronger productivity and innovations through competition. Developing countries now make up close to 40% world trade. And another important aspect of process of globalization, after discussing deepening of economic integration and increasing economic openness, that is economic interdependence. And it is a system by which many companies are economically dependent upon each other. This is where each nation and other economies are dependent on other nations for products and goods and services. For example, the United States today depends on China to provide it many goods. And it shows increasing global nature of society. At the same time, after understanding the process of globalization, and also the globalization is associated with many things. That means globalization is concerned as an important element in the reform package. But what constitutes globalization? The globalization has important parameters. What are those parameters? And reduction of trade barriers so as to permit the free flow of goods across national frontiers. And also another important parameter is creation of an environment in which free flow of capital can take place among nation states. And another important parameter is creation of environment permitting free flow of technology. And also from the point of view of the developing countries and creation of an environment in which free movement of labor can take place in different countries of the world. And if you look at the ground realities, the advocates of globalization, more especially from the developed countries, limit the definition of globalization to only three components, the first three components. And with unhindered trade flows and capital flows and technological flows. You know, why they are insisting capital and technology? Because they are abundant of this technology and capital. Most of these countries surviving on their capital. Look at the countries, the industrialized countries, their investments all over the world, everywhere, knock and corner of the world, they can go and they invest their money. That is the characteristic of developed nations. And developed countries insist on the developing countries to accept their definition and conduct debate within the parameters set by them. This is the difference between the developed countries and the developing countries. And look at the several economists in the developing countries and developing world. The definition is incomplete. And in case of globalization, ultimate aim is to look at upon the world as a global village. Then the fourth component, unrestricted movement of labor, be left out. And the issue here it is WTO and other forms backs out the labor flows as an essential component of globalization. And we cannot ignore the fact that globalization, it indicates the desire to integrate nation states within the overall framework of the WTO, and that is the link between the World Trade Organization and globalization. And the global, we are talking 31 years back about globalization in our country. And if you look at the history, past history, globalization indicates the desire to integrate the nation states. This idea is, we are thinking in recent times, and it is the modern version of the theory of comparative cost advantage. And this theory has propagated by the classical economists, and starting Adam Smith, David Ricardo, William Nazar Sr., John Stuart Mill, and starting in the mid 18th century, sometime in 1776 and to 1870, that 100 years period, starting with the Wealth of Nations, an inquiry into the in 1776, the famous treatise of Adam Smith, and then an inquiry into the nature and cause of wealth of nations, 100 years period, and to provide a theoretical foundations of unrestricted flow of goods from Great Britain to other less developed countries at the time of colonies. It has argued that international specialization, and some countries specialized in one aspect and other countries specialize in other aspects. In such a case, specialization benefits both the countries which are enter into the trade relations. And the same argument has been brought forth by the advocates of the globalization now. They want to export-led pattern of growth to replace the import substitution trade policies earlier. Coming to the argument put forward by the imperialist nations during the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries also emphasized capital and technology flows in these countries because technology is nowadays how important in the modern world, I need not to emphasize. And unfortunately, in this country, we missed industrial revolution. Industrialization started in the mid 18th century, sometime in the 1750s in the Britain, in the case of textiles and printing and other aspects. And later on it spread to the, but unfortunately, the then rulers, the British rulers, not showing any interest to introduce those technological aspects of fruits of to this country. And as a result, into colonist countries, but they could force their will of at the time of, because they were the rulers. It was not materialized, but what they say is final. They are the rulers. And historical evidence reveals that all these trade, capital, and technological flows helped the imperialist nations, so starting from the centuries of history, economic history, and to drain out resources in the poor colonial nations. So because the sun never sets over British Empire, everywhere they rule, and their main aspect is to carry out their natural resources from other different countries and make goods and services in their own country and distribute it to the rest of the world, making money. This was the history. We are aware of that. The imperialist nations thrived at the cost of the colonial countries, who remained in stagnation and poverty. The reason, even today, 40% of this country's population below the poverty line. So this is the historical fact and historical evidence, and were under the rule of colonial regime, and after long drawn struggle, people were able to liberate the country and started self-rule in this country. And during the last 3 decades, so James had mentioned, so the developed nations, more especially USA and European Union countries, these two important parts of the world, have again emphasized globalization as the new mantra for the world development. So the whole world is supposed to develop, and can the economy feed the whole world? Masses. Population has been increasing. In 1820, our population is 100 crores. By 1920, population has reached 200 crores. Look at the population now, so nearly reaching 8 billion very soon. And to reach 100 crores, that means 1 billion population, it took centuries. But just in our generation, we have been looking how population is growing, and for the growing population, development is very, very important, and that's why the developed nations are talking about say globalization as a mantra, and for the development. Development required everywhere in the developing countries. And for the last 75, we are celebrating 75 years of independence, and still we are not categorized as developed nation, because still we are having less than 3 trillion economy. Look at the Chinese economy, and around 15, more than 15 trillion economy. And look at the United States America's economy, more than 22 billion trillion economy. And there is a huge gap. Already, as Ramu Garu already pointed out, these inequalities in the world. And the dichotomy between rich countries and poor countries. And the rich become richer, the poor become poorer. And the same argument is continuing. And the developed nations unable to share some of their resources to eradicate poverty in these countries. This is the situation we are facing in the world. And the concept of development and talking about the sustainable development, people talking about sustainable development goals and human development reports, and the human development is nothing but the enlargement of people's capabilities, enlargement of people's choices. Choice is the most important thing. And unfortunately, the developing countries, they don't have any sufficient choices, the people, and the capabilities are lacking behind in the developing countries. And development is a crucial point from the developing countries' point of view. And that's why the globalization, they wanted to put forward and to attract the developing nations. And globalization want to believe that they are sincere, where the developed countries, they project themselves that sincere. And also now, as a result of the policies of globalization, the developing countries would be able to improve their competitive strength. Where is the competitive strength? And after globalization, where are we? And look at the export intensity of these countries. Maybe if you compare India's export intensity to Singapore and to China, and where are we? And their export intensity is huge, and China's export intensity is huge. They're competing in the world markets with the American country. They're dominating the entire market. And we have seen in recent war between USA and China, how big war this in the case of goods and services production, and competitive strength, and usher in a period of rapid economic growth. And at the same time, consequently, the developing countries are cajoled and through various kinds of soft, hard pressures and pressurized to fall in line. We don't want to fall in line in the globalization, but we were forced to take up this challenge. And we don't have any choice. They didn't ask for any choice, and they didn't give any option for us. But unfortunately, so we were forced to take up this globalization. As a result, it happened in India, the process of dismantling trade barriers. And we followed many, many years, say, import substitution policies. And in the light of globalization, all the policies we revised and replaced, and dismantling trade barriers, and started in
Sir, you have gone on mute, sir. Sir, okay. Sir, you're still on mute. Sir, you're still on mute.
సార్ ప్రొఫెసర్ గారు మీరు మ్యూట్లో ఉన్నారు సార్.
Sir, please unmute yourself, sir.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah,
Yours.
Yeah. Globalization becomes a motivating force for nations to develop themselves at a faster rate. And particularly for the developing countries like India, it opens access to new markets and new technology. Say, India wanted to develop new technology. Where is the technology? We missed the technology. That's why IT revolution came into focus first. This revolution is crucial for our generations. Information technology is crucial for our generations because we missed the industrial revolution. We didn't get the fruits of industrial revolution, but we never missed the agricultural revolution. But we are able to eat a square meal a day, at least it is because of agricultural revolution. We never missed that. And thanks to the the atmosphere of this great country is surviving. So millions of people in this country, it is because of feeding. The Indian economy is able to feed the millions of people. It is because of agriculture sector. And at the same time, the import substitution strategy, this has been replaced by export-led growth during the last 3 decades. And if you look at the recent developments, information and communications technology, we are talking about that, this IT revolution. And so we are talking about the youth population, the demographic dividend, the age group between 18 to 25. India is having highest population in the growth rate in the age group of 18 to 25. And no other country has an advantage of such kind of population. In the entire face of the world, India is the only country having such an advantage. Are we able to take the advantage that our demographic dividend? This is the question before the nation. And if you are able to convert the masses into human resources, that is very important, productive human resources. So with the skill development, with the higher qualifications, higher education levels, literacy levels, and these things will change the world, ameliorate the entire conditions, youth, rural conditions, and urban conditions. Urbanization has been increasing day by day. And we have to plan it now. And without the planning, how can you solve these problems? And that's why the most important, this IT revolution is very, very crucial. We shouldn't miss this revolution, and every person, every youth of this great country, great mass, and will be able to involve in this IT revolution so that we can reach our targets. People talking about 5 trillion economies, and 5 trillion economy is nothing. That's not sufficient to compete the Chinese economy. That's not sufficient to face United States of American economy, and not even British and Italy and German, and they're not in a far better position, but Germans, they're in a good position. And look at the Japanese are good position, but still we are lagging behind when you compare with these industrialized nation countries. And this is a very important. We have to put target 10 trillion economy. Then only we'll be able to compete with any other country in the world with our good population strength. Our strength is our youth. That is the wealth. Real wealth is our youth. We must be able to make use of this population in a better way. That's why international financial markets and trans-border production networks and acceleration in capital flows across national frontiers have been driving forces leading a greater global integration of the economy. And particularly in all these things, and so the older people cannot play a meaningful role, but only youth will be able to play a crucial role. And look at the human development reports. There are 130 in the rank, and these are not sufficient. We look at the education index, health index. So in the pandemic situation, how we suffered in India because of this less than 3 trillion economy. We're not able to meet the challenges put forward by the health crisis, which led the economic crisis. That is the point we want to understand in the recent phenomenon. And the report says that, as mentioned, that globalization is no longer an option. It is true. That is the reality. We cannot negate. We cannot ignore the globalization. We cannot reject the spirit of globalization because we have traveled 30 years of life. As more than a generation we have traveled. And at this stage, and we have to accept the option, and it is the fact. And we well know, say, India has followed the process of globalization for more than 3 decades. And particularly, it is associated not only with the phenomenal spread and volume of cross-border economic transactions, but also with an organization of economic activities. Organization is important. And where do you get the skill? That is the skill. Say, what type of education we impart, what type of education they receive, the youth receive, that is the crucial. And it's an organization of economic activity is the crucial with the startless national boundaries. And from economic point of view, I mentioned some of the aspects, and globalization happens through different channels and trade in goods and services, and also movement of capital and flow of finances. And people talking about not only capital, not only finances, and not only technology, and some other aspects. So the whole point here we have to understand the dichotomy between the developed countries and the developed countries. In the name of development, so they put forward globalization. They brought out the important aspect. The globalization is nothing but monopolizing the technology. Developed countries, developed nations, rich countries, industrialized countries, so northern sphere countries, they wanted to have upper hand over the developing countries. And that's why they're imposing all sorts of things. And they wanted to monopolize the what we call the technology, the obsolete technology. So we don't want the obsolete technology, but they're ready to transfer their obsolete technology. It's a long back they invented in their countries, innovations. And they wanted to get rid of these technologies by selling to the developing world. in the name of globalization, in the name of developed, in the name of say, monopolizing technologies. And so now we're in a difficult situation, whether we accept these technologies, obsolete technologies, outdated technologies, 50, 60 years lagging with the compared to developed countries. So this is the question, but we have to accept, because we are very much needed these technologies. Technology is very much important, because on one hand, population has been increasing, and population growth still it is alarming in the Indian country. But in order to feed masses, this technology is very much needed. And at the same time, the most important aspect, monopolize the finances. Where is the finances? So capital, the FDIs are most important thing. So they have the money. We don't have any money. Where the money is, so only World Bank knows, only IMF knows. Where they are the twin institutions in the hands of rich countries. Our share is very, very limited. So SRD, SDRs is very limited, and we cannot dictate the terms with less than 3%, 3% trade and 2% trade, and cannot dictate the terms Americans and other developed nations. This is the fact, and that's why the monopolization of finances they're dominating, and still they wanted to have upper hand over these countries, and that is the drawback we are facing now. And another important aspect is not only goods and services, trade relations, and at the same time, most important aspect is monopolization of IT, information technology, information revolution. This is the revolution. We hadn't thought of this kind of revolution in our lives, but we have seen in our lives only for the last 20 years. Look at the situation, how information, how quickly moving throughout the world. In a span of seconds, you can reach everybody in the world, last person of the world. That is the greatest trend, the greatest revolution we have seen in our lives, and they wanted to monopolize. This is another important aspect from the developed countries' point of view, in the name of globalization, in the name of with the control of the WTO and the other organizations. And at the same time, another important aspect is mass weapons. They wanted to keep up the mass weapons. Look at in recent times, we are all witnessed how Baghdad was bombarded. Millions of people massacred. So even in other parts of the world, even today, a massacre is taking place. Millions of people are killing, and in the with the lethal weapons. So what we call the important monopolization of these mass weapons. So which is very, very important. They wanted to keep their weapons, some modern times, and to kill anywhere, anybody in the world, any country. So that is another important aspect of globalization. So we noticed it. And these important aspects are alarming between the developed countries and the developing countries. At the same time, what is happening in the name of globalization? The direction of globalization was liberalization of goods and services. That is the first step that are talking about in the name of globalization, which led to an unprecedented expansion of international trade between 50s and 70s. So we noticed soon after our independence, after long done struggle. So the liberalization started and we got independence. And in those days, and followed by the liberalization of regimes for foreign investment, how foreign investment is important, I need not to explain. That's one of the most important economic factor. Without economic investment, we cannot produce goods and services. And at the same time, leading to international investment, and this began in late 60s. And at the same time, that this international investment had two dimensions, and the deregulation of domestic financial sector in the industrialized countries. First, they did it in their own countries. They said in the domestic financial sector in their countries liberalized, and the introduction of convertibility and capital account in the balance of payment. That is the second dimension. And at the same time, domestic financial liberalization has encouraged market forces. That is the key point. In the globalization, we noticed from the developed countries' point of view, by liberalizing their domestic, liberalization, introducing domestic liberalization, the second important aspect is domestic financial liberalization has encouraged not only encouraged market forces, and by reducing the role of state in the financial sector, the role slowly diluting in their countries. And also they wanted to same type of situation create in the developing countries. The demarcation lines between banks, finance companies, and finance and insurance companies, all aspects have been considerably diluted. And at the same time, bond markets and equity markets have been liberalized. And at the same time, controls and regulations on both and inflows and outflows of capital have been removed. And institutional investors have emerged, and developed countries who are both willing to able to invest in global markets. This is the process of liberalization of trade and goods and services. First, it happened in their countries, and as a result, multinational corporations, transnational corporations. So we are ruled by transnationals. Today's world, what to eat, what not to eat, they dictate the terms. So whatever they produce, we have to consume it, and we don't have any choice. It is their choice, and that is the phenomena we are facing in the world, and which have their operations spread over a number of countries, have served an important vehicles. This is these MNCs served an important vehicles of globalization. Globalization has, with the help of MNCs, they are dominating the entire world. And 500 multinational corporations. Even in India, so all domestic industries, so small business people, small entrepreneurs, so they don't have any role to play, and they dictate the terms. They are dominating the entire economy. And at the same time, they account for a large part of foreign direct investment. So wherever they go with the investment. Investment is lacking in the developing countries. Where is, look at the Africa, look at some of the Asian countries, including South Asian countries, and maybe some of the East Asian countries that are better off position. But some of the European countries are better off position. But what about African countries? What about some of the Latin American countries? Look at the Bahamas, Belize, look at Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama. So some of these countries, look at the conditions. So all these important aspects, foreign direct investment and trade in goods and services, very play important role in the. This is the about to understand and the globalization, all these important aspects are very crucial between the developed nations and the developing countries. At the same time, what exactly happening? Coming to the in Indian case, and what exactly our view from the globalization means is generally taken.
Sir, you've gone on mute again. Sir, you're still on mute, sir.
Sir, you're on mute, sir. Sir, please unmute yourself. Sir, please unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah. In our country, integration, globalization means integrating the economy with the rest of the world. What it means, opening the economy to foreign direct investment. We are lagging. We don't have any option. Ask the foreign multinational corporations to come and invest. By providing, we are ready to providing all facilities to foreign companies to invest in different fields of economic activity. Economic activity is important, and that is not very active. Economic cycle is important. Both demand cycle and supply cycle, and both are important. Only if these two cycles move, the economy will be active. In order to activate the economy, and the investment is very much crucial. And inviting foreign investors to come and invest, and also removing the constraints and obstacles to enter the MNCs in India. And whatever you want, take land, or labor is cheap, or electricity is there, and whatever you want, no restrictions. There are boundaries, and we are removing all sorts of boundaries. It's the only way is you come and invest in our countries. And also, say dilution of ultimate scrapping of restrictive laws like Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, all sorts of things, and allowing Indian companies to enter into foreign collaboration. What happens if you collaborate with foreign companies? Nothing will happen, and they benefit. And even if you benefit, it is very meager. And also encouraging them to set up joint ventures abroad, carrying out massive import liberalization programs by switching over from quantitative restrictions to tariffs in the first place, so that there is more transparency in import policy, and then bringing down the level of import duties considerably, and instead of a plethora of export incentives like duty drawbacks, cash compensatory support, and implementation of license and other fiscal incentives, etc. And opting for exchange rate adjustment to promoting exports. All these benefits we are offering to the multinational corporations for the last 30 years, more than 30 years. And also, we have seen industrial policy, trade policy of the government, and foreign capital, multinational corporations, and FARA and FAMA. All these things clearly shows seeds of this globalization process were sown in early 80s. Long back, it started 40 years back. We have been liberalizing country, saying for all sorts of things, because mostly we are dependent on other nations. We don't have any options to feed the people in this country, and we were forced to opt these policies in this country itself, as many concessions were granted to foreign capital, and MNCs were allowed to enter number of crucial sectors, all sectors. You take any defense, we are ready. Railways, we are ready. Whatever left over, you come and take. That's it. And MNCs were allowed to enter a number of crucial sectors, which their entry was previously restricted or banned. There was no, say, license Raj was there, and so many restrictions. So it is not so easy to enter into our domain, but now it is in the name of globalization. It is all these restrictions are removed, and import liberalization process was accelerated and considered, and a downward adjustment in the exchange rate rupee was resorted, and all these things. The real trust to the globalization process was provided by the new economic policy. In the name of new economic policy, and during the Manmohan Singh and P.V. Narasimha Rao regime policy introduced the government of India in July 1991, and that's why we are in 2022, more than 31 years at the behest of IMF and the World Bank. These two institutions forced and to take up this new economic policy. And therefore, globalization has been identified with the policy reforms of 1991. That was the beginning, and subsequent expansion of the reforms carried out in the latter years. And particularly, how India the push towards globalization. That is also equally important. As you know, India's balance of payments problem in the period after 1980-81 was marked by severe balance of payments difficulties. And the second important aspect, that there was no money, say foreign money, dollars, lack of dollars to meet the import bill. And at the same time, the second oil shock pushed in those days, 70s, import bill substantially, while exports lagged considerably. No exports, and because no economic activity, no capital, foreign direct investments. So all sorts of things are there. And that's why the oil bill also considerably increased, and the exports lagging behind. The trade deficit rose as astronomical heights. And also the trade deficit in those days, more than thousands of crores, nearly 15 to 20,000 crores. And also the current account deficit, more than, again, say 18,000 crores. 19. The problem got further accentuated by India's increased reliance on high-cost external commercial borrowings. So, you know, if it is not so easy to get to borrow money from IMF and World Bank. So they put lots of conditions. IMF conditionality. So in those days, it was uproar in the parliament and other places, particularly on this important aspect. And also adopting import compression measures, the pledging of gold abroad. We sold away all the gold in our from country, and the crisis could not be stemmed. And foreign exchange reserves for said exchange reserves dwindled to 1.1 billion in June 1991. This was the situation. What else you can do? You were forced to take up the new economic policy in 1991 July, and by June, say it's only less than sufficient for 2 weeks of import requirements. And the default on debt servicing appeared imminent, and the government of India was pushed to the wall. They don't have any option. And also default could be avoided only if credit was made available from the IMF and the World Bank. Assistance was indeed made available by these institutions, but on their own terms and conditions. These terms and conditions entailed the adoption of stabilization and structural adjustment program. This was the reason for following all over the world globalization. And what exactly the stabilization and structural adjustment program of the IMF and World Bank? And it has three important components: the structural adjustment program of the IMF and World Bank, and the stabilization, which basically implies, say, people, they're imposing stabilize your look the third world countries, you countries stabilize yourself. And for that, we have a mantra. What is that mantra? Stabilization, which basically implies cutting down your fiscal deficits and the rate of growth of money supply. And this is the first point we're imposing if you want any sort of help from our donors. And this is the only thing we can do for your sake. And also domestic liberalization, which consists of relaxing of restrictions and production, investment, prices, and increasing the role of market signals in guiding resource allocations. If you want to resource allocations, it is not your job. Now the job is taken up by the market forces, market signals. They are ready to give the, allocate resources. And at the same time, external sector liberalization. That is another important aspect in the structural adjustment program. What exactly the structural liberalization is nothing but relaxing restrictions on international flows of goods and services, technology and capital. And we want to remove all sorts of restrictions, international flows. So nothing can be stopped. We can import, anyone can import and anyone can export. This is the rule of law, and we have to follow this. And also technology and capital, no hurdles, and whatever technology is available, take it. And now whatever capital you want to take it. And this is the external liberalization. And these three important aspects in the name of a structural adjustment program, IMF and the World Bank initiated. And globalization here identified with the external sector liberalization. It needs to be emphasized on the success. If you want to be success in one aspect, it is not possible. You want to success on three aspects, then only the success will emerge. Otherwise, you cannot expect any kind of success. This is the way of treating in IMF and World Bank in the name of structural adjustment program. And crucial for the success, all aspects, external sector, internal, domestic sector, and at the same time, structural adjustment program in the name of structural adjustment, cutting down the fiscal deficits. And at the same time, the conditions that prevailed in 1991 and pushed India to adapting the structural adjustment program of IMF and World Bank. And globalization is a part of structural. What we are supposed to understand, globalization is the part of a structural adjustment program. And a famous economist, Dilip Swami, is rightly stating that it were the desperate conditions. We don't have any option. We were forced, just like that. We just jumped into the Ganges without any help. And desperate conditions of 90s and 91s pushed India towards globalization. And the most, one important aspect, one step towards globalization, exchange rate adjustment and convertibility. And how it happened, the most important measure for integrating the economy of a country with the global economy is to make its currency fully convertible. And that is the first step. And no hurdles. And there were many laws, and all the laws were diluted. And now you can integrate the economy of a country with the global economy is to make its currency fully convertible. That means allow it to determine its own exchange rate. Don't try to control the exchange rate. On its own, it will leave it to demand and supply conditions, international market, without any official. Who are you to intervene in the exchange rate? That's not none of your business. And also, in the subsequent years, the government has progressively moved towards fully convertibility. And exchange rate policy, foreign exchange reserves, and capital account and convertibility. All these things pushed globalization. And at the same time, import liberalization. And in addition to the phased reduction of import duties, India has a number of, as a member of World Trade Organization, had also committed itself to phasing out quantitative restrictions for many years. And the quantitative restrictions now been totally removed. And moreover, the part of agreement on trade-related intellectual property rights, TRIPS, the Patents Amendment Act 1991 was passed in March 1999. And to provide for exclusive market rights, EMRs, and this was followed by the adoption of Patents Amendment Act 2002 in May 2002, and by Patents Act 2005 in March. The stock argument, if you look at the whole the import liberalization, in favor of import liberalization, is that competition from imports would improve efficiency and quality and technology, besides making international quality capital goods and inputs available to our export industries. And also other important aspects like opening up to foreign capital. We discussed some of the aspects, and also some of the aspects, important aspects, how affects the globalization. The process of globalization, and particularly our foreign currencies reserves, which had fallen to front, our foreign currency reserves to barely $1 billion in June 1991, rose substantially to over 20 billion by March 1991. Like that, slowly it has improved. The growth rates have also improved. I'm not going to discuss all these data and details. It is available everywhere. You can take and have a glance. And was reserves accumulated, and also the Indian enterprises and the process of globalization in India. What exactly led the process of globalization, particularly in the case of India, and led to an unequal competition between the developed countries and the developing countries. And it is happened because of globalization. A competition between giant MNCs and dwarf Indian enterprises. So look at the variation. That means the rich become richer again, the poor become poorer. As we mentioned in the introductory remarks, the inequalities. Even today, India is known for its inequalities. So look at Tatas, Birlas, Ambanis, Goenkas, Mafatlas, and look at their shares in the world, and look at the common man. We are able to provide as a 400 rupees per day to a common man for their daily wage in this country. But whereas the wages as millions of rupees, how distributed unequally in the hands of people in the multinational corporations. And the large Indian experiences are just pygmies compared to the multinational corporations. And some of the people arguing globalization of the Indian economy is like integrating a mouse into a herd of elephants. So you can, if you think like this, how integrating a mouse with the herd of elephants, and definitely it will die. There's undoubtedly, and it will die. Noted also some of the important people. Unequal competition stems from the so many reasons. Unequal competition in the sense the Indian enterprises suffer from size disadvantage. Look at their size and our economy size. There's a lot of variation. And Indian corporate sector for the last 4 or 5 decades, including prior to 1991, operated the protectionist environment. But this production has gone now and in the competitive market. And another important aspect is the cost of capital for Indian business is much higher than MNCs. This is due to reason that real interest rates, our interest rates within the country have been much higher than those prevailing outside India. This is another important reason we suffered, the Indian enterprises suffered a lot. At the same time, business of immense financial strength. MNCs, they're not only in a position to bear losses in any line of business for considerably more time than the Indian capitalists. There's a lot of difference. And Indian firms continue to suffer from handicaps developed under the earlier regimes of controls. All these things, so many things we can talk, but I'm not giving all the information you can find regarding these aspects anywhere in the internet or somewhere. The process of globalization unleashed in 1991 has created a new world, a world in which not only there has been inflow of substantial foreign capital, but the domestic corporate sector for the first time saw itself as the target rather than the beneficiary. That is the tragedy of the highest high-hand activities of the foreign investors. So how can you control them? Is there any mechanism? No, there's no such kind of mechanism to control these MNCs. They are dictating terms, and invariably we have to follow these terms, and that is an unfortunate thing happened in the name of globalization. At the same time, some of the foreign investors initially opted for joint ventures with the Indian partners to gain easy foothold in the domestic unit. But once having consolidated their position, reduced the Indian partner to a subordinate position. That was the situation in the business world. The business tycoons in the country, what happened to these business tycoons? Now they're pygmies with the globalization, in the name of globalization. That was the situation. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things about the World Trade Organization. There's no doubt about it. In all our lives, international economic relations, and not only international economic relations, but also international trade relations. One of the greatest event happened in recent times, that it has been setting up of a World Trade Organization. And this happened in 1995, just more than 25 years back. And it has its own one generation, one generation time, age it has accumulated. And WTO, we all know, replaced GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. It was formalized in 1947 and signed by 23 countries in 1947. And India was also one of the founder members of GATT. Or the membership of GATT swelled 1994, 118 countries. GATT was also concerned with the promotion of international trade. Of course, it is meant for that purpose only, through tariff reduction. The purpose is tariff reduction, doing away with the non-discriminatory practices among trade and partners, and which is impossible. It never happened in the GATT history. So far, 8 rounds we completed. In the last 8 rounds, we haven't seen such kind of development. And always there were negotiations, discussions in the multilateral agreements, and also the GATT provided for reduction of tariffs and trade restrictions in a phased over a period of time, and the task could be accomplished in different rounds. And 8 rounds of multilateral trade negotiations were held under the auspices of GATT, and Geneva 1947, and France 1949, and United Kingdom 50-51, 4th, 5th, and 6th, Geneva again 56, 60, 61, and 64, 67, the 7th in Tokyo, and 73 and 79, and the 8th and final round in Uruguay, 86 to 94, long years, more than 8 years. Uruguay round, the 8th round took more than 8 years of complex negotiations. And we know as there were considerable differences among the nations, existing among the member nations on various issues, under like question of agriculture subsidies. They are offering the huge, developed nations offering huge quantity of subsidies to their farmers, whereas we are unable to offering meager subsidies to our farmers. And that is the biggest concern. And the multi-fiber agreement, and also the market access, trade in services, anti-dumping, and intellectual property rights, all these things. And because of the substantial differences among member nations on these contentious issues, and particularly the then Director General of GATT, Arthur Dunkel, and came up with a draft outcome of the Uruguay. And this was absolutely nonsense. And all the developed countries as a tooth and nail, talked against this this report, and came out with a draft financial act. And this was offered as a single treaty, that is a form of package. And draft was heavily biased, and that's why nobody, developing countries, never shown any interest in favor of, and this draft is in favor of developed countries and against the developing countries. And the governments for developing countries succumbed, and on April 15th, 1994, the final act was ultimately approved and signed. That was the black day in the history of international trade negotiations, and that made the new form of negotiations, initiation of WTO in January 1st, 1995. And ultimately, the final act was signed. Members of nations got to sign the final act. It appears everything went on with the consensus of all. Of course, we are all voted for that, because we don't have anything to say.
Sir, will you please conclude in 5 minutes, sir?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And all these functions and organizations of we have seen, and issues, particularly the first ministerial conference, Singapore, and information technology, negotiations on information technology. That is the crucial for the development of any nations in the world. And so the developing countries don't have any crucial role playing in that important negotiations. Relationship between trade and investment, interaction between trade and competition policy, transparency in government procurement, and trade facilitation. All this Doha development agenda have seen agreement on trade, agreement on agriculture, and agreement on trade and textile clothing, and multi-fiber agreement on market access, agreement on trims, agreement on trips, and agreement on services, and dispute settlement body. All these important aspects. And also most important aspect, these negotiations still continuing the world economy and global integration, and particularly say at what stage we are in. So this is a very important aspect, and at this stage, somebody mentioned about Stiglitz, and rightly pointed out the Nobel laureate from the developing countries' point of view, and this negotiations are not at all in favor of developing countries. So to reduce poverty, developing countries, the poor countries, some of the poor nations in Africa, they're asking to stop eating ice creams in our countries, so that we can give that amount to eradicate poverty in our countries, because people are dying in our countries because lack of food, not even getting a square meal a day, and they are unable to provide such kind of help to the developing countries. As a result, there is a dichotomy between the developed nations and the developing countries. That's why a new order is supposed to come, supposed to emerge, and the negotiations so far, more than 11 ministerial conferences held. In all these conferences, mostly they failed, and mostly the nations took in favor of developed nations, but not developing countries. And this gap is supposed to bridge, and who is going to bridge? It is the only the capabilities of the people in their countries and the strength of the governments. And we are supposed to strengthen ourselves, and then only to increase our economy. And we are supposed to stand on our own legs without depending on others. It is possible. Who is going to be number one in the world? India is going to be number one in the world, and India is going to achieve $5 trillion or $10 trillion. It is possible only with the help of people. And the only thing is when we are able to convert the masses into productive human resources, it is quite possible. Thank you very much for giving me this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It's a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Professor ప్రసాద్ రావు గారు సుమారుగా 1:25 పాటు, సుమారుగా గంటన్నర సమయం పాటు ప్రపంచీకరణ, ప్రపంచ వాణిజ్య సంస్థ, భారత్ రూపమైనటువంటి అంశం పైన చాలా లోతైనటువంటి విశ్లేషణ చేయడం జరిగింది. ప్రధానంగా ప్రపంచీకరణ అంటే స్థానిక దేశాల మధ్య ఉండేటువంటి ఆర్థిక వ్యవస్థలను ప్రపంచ ఆర్థిక వ్యవస్థకు అనుసంధానం చేయడంగా ప్రధానంగా చెప్తుంటే, ప్రపంచం లోపల ఉండేటువంటి ఆ వస్తువులను కానీ, సేవలను కానీ, లేదా టెక్నాలజీ కానీ, వీటన్నిటిని ఎగుమతులు దిగుమతి చేసుకోవడం అనేటువంటిది ప్రధానమైనటువంటి అంశంగా ఇవాళ భారతదేశంలో ఐటీ సెక్టర్ ఇంతగా అభివృద్ధి చెందిందంటే దానికి ప్రధానంగా ఈ యొక్క ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ టెక్నాలజీ అభివృద్ధి చెందిందంటే ఈ ప్రపంచీకరణ అనేటువంటి విషయాన్ని కూడా చెప్తూనే, ప్రపంచమే నేడు ఒక గ్లోబల్ విలేజ్ గా మారిపోయింది అనేటువంటి విషయాన్ని చాలా స్పష్టంగా వారు తెలియజెప్పారు. ప్రధానమైనటువంటి అంశం ఏంటంటే ప్రపంచాల మధ్యలో అంతరాలు అనేటువంటివి కూడా పెరుగుతున్నాయి. ధనిక దేశాలు ఇంకా ధనిక దేశాలుగా అభివృద్ధి చెందుతుంటే, పేద దేశాలు ఇంకా పేదలుగా మారిపోతున్నారు అనేటువంటి విషయాన్ని కూడా చాలా స్పష్టంగా తెలియజెప్పడం అనేటువంటిది జరిగింది. ప్రపంచం లోపల యువత అనేటువంటిది భారతదేశంలో 18 to 25 years వరకు యువత ఉన్నారు అనేటువంటి విషయాన్ని కూడా ప్రొఫెసర్ ప్రసాద్ రావు గారు చెప్పారు. వారికి మా తెలంగాణ జనవేదిక తరఫున ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు సార్. ఇంకెవరన్నా మిత్రులు
Yeah, Dr. Madhusudan Ghosh, he asked, is from Delhi. Yeah.
మధుసూదన్ ఘోష్.
Good evening, everyone present here. Sir, is I am audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Thank you for it's been a immense pleasure to listen to all of you. And actually, you people have already covered what I'm going to ask. So, sir, as we all know that globalization is a major engine that has the wide potential for the growth, sustainable growth of across the world. So, sir, one question I want to highlight, one question I want to ask, sir, how these organizations, World Bank group that had 5 organizations and the UN group, the like ICES, Z, FAO, UNDP, Maritime Law Convention, how they were effective to neutralize the effect of globalization on least developed countries, means who are at the set mark below the HDI, the mark that been set for the least developed countries in HDI. So how they should cope up in this scenario of globalization? So should they relax more inflow of FII, FDI, or as we have seen that China has exploited many resources from the Africa, and that country is still not getting any kind of positive growth, right, sir? So I just want to know how they should go, what should be their strategy to maintain a good positive growth rate, and how this organization should look after how should they favorize their decision in favor of these least developed countries. So how should this go?
Thank you. One more question. There's an iPhone who raised their hand. Please go ahead. Please introduce yourself and please ask the question.
Sir, good evening to everybody. My name is Vai Ramakrishna from Andhra University. My voice is audible?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Audible.
Yeah, my question is globalization another word for Americanization? Is globalization another word for Americanization or not?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Another question is why is there an increasing poverty and inequality?
Already they explained, but still he will try to answer. This is Dipendu Chaudhary. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir. Professor Prasada Rao. I am a very little student in this context, and as well as I would like to inform everybody that I am not confident in English because I am from Bengali medium. This is my problem. Anyway, after 31 years free trade on behalf of globalization, Indian country and as well as global others countries, what I understood that globalization is not success. So is it failed, or during the period of President Trump, he considering his thought and his intellectual team that globalization and free trade, it was not success in the context of global economy. What is your stand? What is your opinion? Please, sir.
Okay, sir. Will you answer these 3 questions? Then we'll ask next set of questions. We'll take another set.
Yes.
Yeah.
The first question is, can we get on with this growth rate? And the thing is, in recent times, if you look at the growth rates, in the pandemic situation, the growth rates are alarming, not only in India, all over the world. But before that, and just before COVID-19, the growth rate was around 4.5%. And later on, due to COVID, it was a turned negative growth rate. In some sectors, particularly almost all the sectors except agriculture, we faced negative growth rates. And even before as well, sometimes growth rates improved a lot in the case of India. After that, the growth rates have been declining. So the problem with the growth rate is it is not job-oriented growth, and most of the time it is a jobless growth. And at the same time, the problem with the Indian growth rate is the growth rate is stopped somewhere in the middle. It is not going down. As a result, if the growth rate is not reaching the poor and downtrodden or ultra poor, it is very difficult to accelerate the growth rate further. And that's one reason we observed. And as a result, it is taking time. And the exports in recent times also, if you look at the foreign direct investments, and we are lacking behind in terms of foreign direct investment. All these important aspects. Say the global economy has slowed down, and the Indian economy is also slowed down. The impact on compared to other countries, India has much suffered because of low economic activity. For the less than 3 trillion, and we are unable to face the global economy because it required a lot of what we call health infrastructure. And so we're unable to provide this health infrastructure. As a result, huge loss of humankind, and at the same time, faces of other important problems. It is because of all these things it happened. And so maybe in the future, so when you are able to convert the youth into human resources, you can accelerate the economy, and it can be possible in the future course of time. That's what I feel. The other important question, Americanization. So what all is looking at the entire economy, that is Americans are dominating the entire economy with more than 60,000 per capita income dollars, and whereas in China's around I think $15,000, and whereas in India it is less than $3,000. And you can think with the present per capita income levels, whether it is Americanization or globalization, you can think about it. Ramakrishna, okay? And the other important raised is what exactly the third question?
I just want to know that globalization is failed or not. There any chance to get all countries free trade, free economy? Is it possible before COVID-19 period or after
Before
COVID-19?
After COVID-19, is it possible? What?
Globalization economy, globalized economy, globalization thought concept after GATT agreement.
At the moment, globalization is active. There's no doubt about it, because
Okay.
all the countries participating in the globalization, they were forced. And the globalization is administered by the WTO.
Right.
So there it is possible only multilateral negotiations. But sometimes the development countries are doing bilateral relations as well, bilateral negotiations as well, because
Right.
they have the power. They are dealing with case by case and dealing by country by country. And they are not negotiating throughout the multilateral decisions. They are not taking multilateral decisions, and they are taking by bilateral decisions between the countries. How they are dealing. And if you look at the past history and all the decisions, including nine rounds of GATT and after 25 years of WTO experiences, all the decisions in favor of developed countries only, not in favor of developing countries. As a result, domestic industries have suffered a lot. Domestic entrepreneurs suffered a lot,
Yes,
and
sir, yes.
our agriculture suffered a lot. The industries are not going improving, and all these things because lack of industrialization. We don't have any sufficient capital in these countries. On one side, population has been increasing. On the other side, the economy is not in a position to feed the growing population. All these problems are there.
Sir, SME also suffering.
Sir?
MSME.
Yes,
Micro.
SMEs are most important for generation of employment. But
Right.
unfortunately, these SMEs are not in a position to generate employment sufficiently to the growing population. Because on one hand, as urbanization has been increasing, but urban slums are increasing. So if you look at the situations, we don't have any plans at the moment. So urbanization is a very, very important problem to tackle the growing population. And we have to plan now itself in order to improve the SMEs and improve the employment conditions, generation of employment. When agriculture is passive, non-agriculture is supposed to be active. When non-agriculture is passive, agriculture is supposed to active, because most of the agriculture conditions in this country is gambling of monsoons, and only 6 months it is a fact. Only 50% is able to provide irrigation facilities. The rest is depending on the mercy of the God. And under these circumstances, MSs are very important to generate employment. Non-agriculture sector is very important to generate adequate employment. The linkage effect is very important between the agriculture and non-agriculture sector. But at the moment, all the linkages, production linkages, consumption linkages are effective. And unfortunately, the linkage effect between the agriculture and non-agriculture SMSs are very weak at the moment. In order to strengthen the link to generate the employment is possible. Then
Thank
only
you.
we can think about it.
Thank you, sir. There's one more question from Dr. Masudan Reddy. And after that, Professor Sudhakar will give. And I'll allow only two more questions after Professor Sudhakar, please. Masudan Reddy, please go ahead.
Sir, am I audible, sir? Good evening to everyone, sir.
Yeah, you are audible.
Especially Telangana Jana Vedika, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Sir, there was a good talk on WTO and the globalization, sir. Sir, for the last 30 years, what we have been listening is that there are bitter, protagonists and antagonists about economic reforms. The growth-led economy support, and whoever come to power, they support reforms, and whoever are in the opposition, they oppose because they are affecting the lives of the common people, and they oppose it bitterly. And the developmental indexes, especially human development indexes, are very low with regard to Indian situation, that we all know about that. But with regard to WTO, what is happening, when USA benefited, it supported WTO and it made it very active. But now for the last 1-2 years, what is happening, the USA is trying to scuttle the every effort of WTO. It has almost made it redundant almost, because the appellate body which settles the disputes, or whatever decision is taken by the panel of WTO with regard to trade dispute, and the appeals are received by appellate body. The members of the appellate body are not being appointed. There are many vacancies, and USA is scuttling the entire mechanism of the WTO functioning, that it is doing, because the China is benefiting. For the last 10 years, China is is at advantage at every trade and trade dispute. Now many countries are trying to come out by regional economic cooperation, RICEP, and transatlantic countries. They are trying to come out and find out another plurilateral bodies. So many they want to come out of the WTO. Now the almost WTO has become stagnant. So that is what is happening now. The globalization, the trend of globalization has slowed down. So in this overall context, and especially when we see the main problem now WTO is facing, it is because of USA, especially the minimum support price. They want all minimum support prices to be eliminated. And as part of it, Indian government passed, as you all know, 3 farm laws, and how farmers affected, and they launched a big movement and made the government to take back those laws. So we all know that. So especially when we look at the last 3 decades of reforms, it is clearly can be understood that it is beneficial to only multinational corporations, and the people at the field, whether the farmers or peasants or poor people, they are suffering. So whatever reforms they have been taking up, it's because of the reforms the people are suffering. This is the experience of every common man throughout the world. But when people come to power, they forget about this, they forget about the common man, and they promote in a big way all these WTO dictated reforms. But we, the intellectuals, we always remain indifferent. When we come to power, we completely remain indifferent. When we are in opposition, we try to bitterly criticize them. So in this overall context, I would like to ask the professor whether reforms need to be bitterly opposed, or there should be priority with regard to where the reforms have to be initiated. When we take the case of India, especially social sector like health and education, they have been completely neglected, and we have seen the bitter consequences of it after the pandemic. So in this overall context, what as the intellectuals we should talk about reforms, where we should make
Thank you.
prioritized.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Professor Sudhakar, sir.
Sir, thank you very much. Really, it is a highly technical and international economics related discourse, where many of us, like me, are much illiterates, I think. Now, in this connection, I would like to draw my memories about 3 decades back when the Dunker draft was in the air. I was also associated with the National School of India University as a research year, where I was trying to do something about impact of this from the intellectual property rights point of view. But when this very concept has become a necessary evil, and people have now become only silent spectators, then in fact I have simply become ignorant about these things, because basically I am not from economics background, but I am a law professor. So therefore, but however, what I think is that definitely in 1991, as Professor Prasada was telling, it is a compelling condition whereby under a very necessities, where the balance of payments, more particularly the hard currency that is available to the tune of about 1.1 billion US dollars equivalent, was just scanty enough to meet the requirements of single digit days for the country, and definitely after 10 days or something like that, maybe 2 weeks, the country would become bankrupt. And so therefore, in order to save the face and all this, these things have come into existence, and these are the so-called the operations are actually having mixed things. And my concern is about the multinationals, transnationals, internationals, and companies like that, where they have got digital office in one country, manufacturing in second country, and operation and marketing in third country. And these are all permanent; they will be changed interchangeably, and even they can go away. So therefore, they are called popularly, to my knowledge, as a night fly companies. Any time they may go. And it's also we are experiencing about the FIIs and FDIs, which are just escaping. So with this compelling condition, definitely, unless something is to be done, how could we come out of this? Actually is a very big subject, and here I would like to draw out the attention to these China phones, smartphones. Fortunately, there was no bilateral agreement between India and China, so therefore we could able to prevent China's smartphones. Otherwise, imagine what would have been done about safety and security of this country. We could able to ban, because in the absence of any bilateral agreement, in the absence of any multilateral agreements. So bilateral agreements, I think, can be dispensed with under certain conditions. So these are all certain complex issues that are associated with these things. So I think what one a lot of doubts and all that, but definitely this being an academic discourse, and it requires a lot of considerations and heavy discussions on it. So therefore, I will be deferring all my doubts at appropriate time for future. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Swati.
Hello,
Go ahead, Swati.
good evening. Thank you, Professor, for such a wonderful talk. You highlighted so many different aspects related to the topic in brief, which was enough for everyone to start thinking. And it's like to be able to explain all this in a short time. It's a great deal. Thank you so much for that. So my question is that, globalization today, from a social, political, or an economic point of view for a developing country, is very essential. It helps, for development, but there are also some of the impacts that we face to it. Like you talked about the domestic produce and about the trade factors. I would want to ask, like, if developing countries, if they want to enhance their external trades with the other countries, is it like viable for these countries without disturbing the geography or exploiting the natural resources? Because there has been a debate in the economics, like the resources, when they are exploited, to a certain extent, the development happens. Can we promote this economic growth without the exploitation of the resources, or by geographically bridging the countries?
Thank you. So, sir, you please answer these questions. There are two questions in the chat box. Then we will answer that and we'll close the issue.
Yes, Madhusudan Reddy garu, you have a better understanding the whole situation, and you are asking, is there any role for the intellectuals? Definitely, there is an intellectual role. The role is we have to educate ourselves, and we have to educate the people as well. And that is the only, with the better education, with the better understanding of the situation. We are talking about knowledge hubs. It is knowledge is nothing but understanding gained by the personal experience, and that experience is given each and everybody in this and unfortunately, say with more than 25% of the illiterates, and we are unable to provide such kind of knowledge to the people. As a result, in the parliament and the assemblies, and much debate has not been going on. And on these important issues, so a lot of discussion is required, so in-depth knowledge is required, and firm decisions is required, and then only we'll be able to do something to the bad effects of the globalization. That role certainly we have to play in the coming years to eradicate as a adverse impact on the Indian economy. That's the other thing is Sudhakar Garu is mentioned a very important aspect, the role played by the MNCs. So, what shall we do? We cannot do at this juncture, because those stages have already gone, already crossed. And what I want to say, if there is anything anything bad to the people's point of view, from the common man point of view, from the from agriculture point of view, industry point of view, any section wise, if you look at the people, and certainly we have to negate such kind of actions taken by the World Bank or initiated by the other aspects in consultation with the other countries. And the point here is as long as we unite, and all the developing countries, the point here is the unity of developing countries. We have to muster the unity of the developing countries. And there are economic interests are there, and other interests are there. We can understand the situation, but at the same time, we have to carefully distinguish these differences, and for a better understanding, for negotiations, and we can solve certain kinds of situations, problems. That is the only solution. Definitely, MNCs are in the coming years, they play a crucial role. But we have to protect our native industries and native entrepreneurs. We have to give protection to the native entrepreneurs, and all these things are there. And for that, we need strong policies. Whether you follow corporate policies, rich policies, and poor policies, you have to decide. And people are massively supported by the masses, and they'll take the decisions in favor of masses, and that action is required. And for that, we need to bring some sort of what we call inspire the people, and also some sort of intellectual caliber is required. And in the case of bodies like parliaments and assemblies, and how people are strong enough to argue properly from the people's point of view, not from the rich people point of view. Then only we can think about some sort of justice will be done to the against the multinational corporations, to the small business people in this country, to the common people in this country. And at the same time, the third point, Swati is mentioning. I just I forgot one clue. Could you please, Swati?
Yes, sir. So my question,
you're asking.
My question was for the developing countries to be able to achieve a circular economy, it's like without the exploitation of the natural resources and depending more on green resources. So, like when we talk about the circular economy, it is in a way exploiting the green resources again. But that's what we are moving towards.
Yeah, exploitation is necessary. Without exploitation of natural resources, and the societies cannot move. But at the same time, over exploitation is the problem. And at the same time, it is the responsibility of the nation to see that over exploitation of natural resources should not be there. If it is there, and the sustainable development cannot take place. And our argument is sustainable development is very, very important for future generations. We have to keep some sort of resources for the survival, and that is very important. And for that, the policies of governments and the policies of the present representatives of the people, so their argument and their intelligence capabilities are very important, so that we can give a place for the sustainable development.
Is it justifiable that the rate with which we are exploiting our resources under the term of circular economy, are we headed towards more concrete future than circular economy and truthful?
And what else you can do? And on one side, population has been increasing, and we have to provide a square meal a day at least to the growing population, and without exploiting and without circulation, and the circulation must be very active, and as long as population is growing, and the circulation would also be in the same way, it should increase, and it should not be mismatched. It should be matched, and then only we can think about the progress of the country. And growth is important, and how can you achieve without involving the people in the economic activity? Economic activity is the combining the factors of production, land, labor, capital, organization. Goods and services important, and but unfortunately, the human development is missing. A country like India take is a 130 in terms of educational levels, in terms of economic levels, in terms of health index, and all aspects. It is downgraded, and that without exploitation of the natural resources properly, and without proper circular economy, and how can you achieve the sustainable development within the country? And it is possible to some extent with the help of exploitation to some extent only, and leaving it to the what we call market forces, not to the market forces. The globalization insisting to allotment, to leave it the allotment of resources to the market forces. If you give it to the market forces, what happens to the common man's life, their living standards, and their living standards are at stake because of the intervention of the globalization process, and globalization, multinational role played by the multinational corporations, and that's why we are worrying.
Thank you, sir. Well, there are two questions in the chat box. After that, James wants to have a question, and Manoj will also have a question. What should be the strategy of India as there are trends in deglobalization across some countries? This is Shankar Rao. And how the second question is from Pendli Ashok Babu, how do we protect public health system and public education system, including universities, under, under state government to reach the unreached and depressed classes of the populous country? Please suggest measures how to cope up with the challenges of globalization and to harvest its advantages to our India because of the demographic dividend due to high rate of youth population. I think you answered this question in the beginning only.
Yes.
Yeah, these are the two questions, sir.
Yes. The first question related to strategy.
Yeah.
What strategy do we need? What strategy is a strategy? If you don't have any strategy, and how can you survive in the present modern societies? And we have 50 crores of population out of 139 crores of population. So 50 crores of population between the age group 15 to 60, 65 years are able to as a working force, and they're working and remaining are as a dependents, either elderly people or young children. Are under these circumstances, definitely you need a strategy. Your strategy is supposed to increase economic strength in the sense wealth of nations. Without increasing the wealth of nation, how can you feed the 139 crores of population in this country? And for that you need a strategy. That strategy must be adopted to increase the growth of, increase the economic activity, increase the growth, increasing and the employment of people, and from all angles, and that growth must be reached to the common man, and also it must reduce the income inequalities, wealth inequalities, health inequalities, all sorts of income. Look at the country. So the country is controlled by any number of inequalities, a caste, creed, color, different kinds of situation. So you have to clearly understand the whole situation and different kinds of hundreds of castes are there, hundreds of languages are there, their food habits are different, and their cultural differences are there. You have to understand the whole society as and bring them as a people are divided at the moment, and we are supposed to bring them on single hand and make them as a work, make them involve them. So, what happened to the agriculture sector? As a only is 20% is able to work. So remaining are even if you remove them, agriculture doesn't affect that kind of situation we are having. What is you don't have any strategy about that? And definitely you need a strategy. How to involve these people? How to, whether you absorb in the agriculture sector, if your agriculture sector is unable to absorb them, what strategy do you need? Or bring them to the industrial sector, or then bring them service sector or tertiary sector, whatever. For that, so what do you need? So what people want from the country, and if you give water to them, can they contribute something to the growth? If you give some industries, if you bring some acreage in the field, and all these things are strategies. And look at what sort of strategy do you need in order to make them work in the economy. Then only you can make economy active. That's the one important aspect I just want to mention. The other important, sir, Ramu garu.
Sir, you have already answered that question, sir. You have already answered that question.
Okay, right.
James would like to ask you a few questions. I don't think they are questions. And Manoj.
Yeah.
Manoj Reddy, last before. Manoj Reddy,
James.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Professor. I just like to make a brief comment. So we really enjoyed your talk. It was of phenomenal depth, and also you have clearly stated the between economic power and political power, there exists reciprocity in understanding the globalization institutions and multinational corporations, and also we have informed us that we have to equip ourselves with knowledge to understand the far-reaching consequences of what is about to happen in the future. And as you said, it appears that the absolute gains and the relative gains are being the beneficiaries of these are the developing nations only. And for that, we really need to sit and strategize a lot and come up with solutions. So there's a lot of work to be done ahead for a lot of people, especially in the intellectual class. And thank you for absolutely phenomenal talk, sir. It was really brilliant. So much we got so much knowledge out of it. And it has been a real pleasure listening to you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
The last one, Manoj Reddy garu.
Yes, sir. Firstly, Guru Garu, Purushottam Rao gariki namaskaralu telupukuntu. Thank you so much, Professor Prasada Rao garu, for giving your valuable time and sharing your vast experience on this wonderful evening. And I thank you so much. Of course, Sunday is a family day. Being that day, you gave so much time to us. Thank you so much, sir. And a small question from my side is, sir, globalization, of course, we have gone through this 30 years, ups and downs we saw in it. And of course, the whole world was kept in lockdown for this. We gone through this pandemic and all this. These are all the phases of globalization, sir. And what the straight question from my side is, for coming generations, is this globalization is going to be a boon for the coming generations, or it's going to be a curse, sir?
That is the wonderful question. That is the wonderful question.
Thank you, sir.
Depends upon the capabilities of the next generations. If it is, if they are capable enough, and they can make it as a boon. If they are not capable enough, it's going to curse. It depends upon the capabilities of the people. That's why we are struggling. At the beginning, I mentioned that our ambition is to train the next generation, not ourselves. Our generation's role is over, but the next generation is supposed to play. And we want to make them capable enough.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Sir, before I hand over the mic to the moderator, I'll have just two comments. We'll have it some other time. When you were talking about MSMEs, you see, Gandhiji, before the freedom, he wanted to have a Gram Swaraj. That is, he wanted village as a republic. So we forgot about the Gram Swaraj and we are going for a rapid urbanization in the wake of the globalization. So we will have a talk on this Gram Swaraj. And at the same time, you were talking about under the guise of sustainable development, we are exploiting natural resources. I quote Marx here. Marx, what he said is, each according to his necessities and each according to his capacities. So that has to be the world order today, to protect the natural resources instead of exploitation. We'll have this talk some other time, sir, because we are running short of time and this is a huge subject. Anyway, this was a wonderful talk we have given today, sir. Thank you so much.
థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్.
Thank you very much, Andy.
థ్యాంక్ యూ. తెలంగాణ జన వేదిక జూమ్ ఆన్లైన్ మీటింగ్ వచ్చేసి కీలక ఉపన్యాసం ఇచ్చినటువంటి ప్రొఫెసర్ ప్రసాద్ రావు గారికి మా తెలంగాణ జన వేదిక తరఫున ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు సార్. అదేవిధంగా ఈనాటి కార్యక్రమంలో పాల్గొన్నటువంటి ప్రతి ఒక్కరికి, ప్రొఫెసర్ విశ్వనాథ రెడ్డి గారికి మరియు ప్రొఫెసర్ కృష్ణారావు గారికి, కృష్ణ ప్రసాద్ గారికి, ఇతర మిత్రులు ప్రొఫెసర్ సుధాకర్ గారికి, ఇతర ప్రొఫెసర్లందరికీ కూడా పేరు పేరున ధన్యవాదాలు తెలియజేసుకుంటూ ఈనాటి ఈ కార్యక్రమం ఇంతటితో ముగుస్తుంది. వచ్చే వారం ఇంకొక టాపిక్ తో కలుసుకుంటామని ధన్యవాదాలు అందరికీ. గుడ్ నైట్.